In this episode, we speak to Tyson Tuala, the founder of Melbourne Cultural Consultants. He does deep work in engagement of different cultures around Melbourne, Australia, and in his hometown in New Zealand as well. We start this episode with a guided meditation, and Tyson runs us through an acknowledgement of country in his language as well. So if you want to learn about how to engage different cultures, how to build resilience in yourself through your culture so that you can open yourselves up to understand other people's culture, this is not one to be missed. Join in now. All right, welcoming Tyson Tuala to the OKIRU podcast today.
OKIRU.
And before we begin, I'd like to just bring you all into a short guided meditation practice.
Let's go.
Have you done much meditation before, Tyson?
I've done different types of meditation before.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've done one in a while, but yep, I'm in.
Okay. So inviting you all to find a comfortable seat wherever you are, somewhere where you can sit and find stillness for the next 5 to 7 minutes. And inviting you all here today and listening at home is to close down the eyes and finding your own stillness. Deep down, your body knows how to find it. But with all this stimulation, all the demands on your attention in this modern day world, you have to fight for focus. You have to fight for stillness. And right now is an opportunity to do so. So let's bring your attention to your breath, observing the inhales and the exhales in and out of your nose. Feeling the journey of your breath as it enters your nose. Feeling your lungs expand. Your chest rising, your belly filling up with this beautiful, nourishing life force that is your breath. And noticing how natural and automatic it is to receive a breath. You don't have to do anything at all. But you can feel your body receiving the breath. And as you are fixated and directing your attention to the journey of your breath through the nose, through your lungs, finding the top and the bottom of the breath. As you go through the cycle, notice the moment of suspension between the inhale and the exhale. So there are many dimensions to our breath. We can feel it in so many different ways. So my invitation to you now is to take your right hand, put it at your heart center, taking your left hand and placing that onto your belly, and observing the felt sensation of the breath through your chest as you inhale and fill your chest with air, and the exhale as your body and belly softens on the exhale. Feeling your body react to receiving the breath. And in meditation, we find it is so natural for thoughts to enter our minds. Meditation is not about clearing your mind, but just observing, using the breath as an anchor for awareness. And if thoughts do come, and they will come, watching them float on by and watching them pass. So wherever you are now, invite you to take your hands and cup them over your eyes and your face. And gently blinking and reintegrating into the space and where we are at now. Taking your hands and maybe rubbing your thighs just to reintegrate into the space and feel where we're at. And getting ready for just a beautiful conversation together about culture, about the impact of multiculturalism in Australia. And look, Tyson, I invite you to do an acknowledgement of country as well. And with your experience, I'd love to hear your take on it.
Cool. Man, you got to warn me before those, bro. Nearly fell asleep on your couch. That was awesome. For me, generally speaking, before I do an acknowledgement now, I normally let people know that I'm going to do an acknowledgement in language. Mm-hmm. And it's probably, I let people know that because there's been times where because I've been so lucky enough to be able to relearn one of my, languages, is that I've been so confident and so happy to speak it, but then I've seen the reaction of someone that I'm acknowledging be like ashamed or shy because they've been unable to learn theirs, or theirs has been lost, quite possibly forever. So generally speaking, now I'll go, I'm going to do this in language. Yeah. And then I go, because it's either I acknowledge you in one of my languages, which is probably the biggest respect that I can give, or I'll acknowledge you in the language of our mutual oppressor. And they're like, your language. And I'm like, sweet as, I'll go in it. So maybe a little bit about this acknowledgement as well. One of our matriarchs of our community had met with a First Nations lady here and had asked, how can we, what is this acknowledgement about? What's the essence of an acknowledgement, and why do we do this? And so she had talked to this matriarch of our community, Nana. I'll probably refer to her a couple of times during this conversation. And the cool thing about this acknowledgement was that she said, this is where we start. This is a generic acknowledgement that I would give somebody if, they needed something and didn't understand anything. But, she said, acknowledge us or the land or our people or our ancestors as if they were a person in front of you. Like, how are you going to talk to them? And so that was the first bit of learning we got. And she wrote this acknowledgement out for Nana, and Nana gave that to me and said, this is where we start on our journey of acknowledgement. I said, cool, we'll start here. And we went into a couple of different spaces, which I'll probably talk about. And then we asked one of our, I'd say, great orators now, one of our, the person who translates our performing arts lyrics live during our largest performing arts, competition into English. We asked if he would give metaphorical meaning in Māori to this acknowledgement, so that when we acknowledge, we could acknowledge in Māori. And so he did that, and then passed it back to us and taught us about what he meant, what he wanted to say, or how he was going to say it. And now we have our own acknowledgement. And generally speaking, we will use that acknowledgement in Māori whenever we are public facing to show our commitment as a people. But when I do an acknowledgement of country, say at a meeting or individually in my own team, I'll just talk and it'll just go. I don't really have a flow. We always acknowledge land, and then probably those that have passed, and then bring it back to those that are here. And that's our flow, because that's how we acknowledge people in Aotearoa in New Zealand. But this is how it goes anyway. E mihi ana ki ngai iwi take o te whenua moemoe ngā pākaiahi o te ahi kai pupuri tone nei te mauri o te whenua. Ka mei ki ngā tupuna me ngā urupa o rātau mā, ka mei hoki ki ngā iwi take o te aokoraihi mai te rānei. A tēnei te whakamihi ki a koutou katoa, e kawe nei ngā maru āpō o rātau mā me ngā kaupapa hūhua te hāpori. Tūturi o whiti whakamaua kia tīna, haumi e hui e tae ki. So that's our acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land, those that have cared for the land for, the generations that have gone. I know there's so many dates, and we've got like 35,000, 65,000. For however many years that this land was that's however many years that this land has supported life on it, and then for those that have cared for it and made their marks on this land, it's just been beautiful to be able to get to this spot. In that rūruku, we also talk about those that are the keepers of the lights, or the keepers of the fire. So those are the people that keep the fire burning, that continue to fight for what's right. We also acknowledge everyone else. So those that are in their own space and time, those are the first, like that global First Nations approach. Who's here to meet, and who's here in the same values that we hold anyway. We also talk about the rights of like land, water, air, fire, all those different things in that rūruku. And rūruku is the Māori word for an acknowledgement, or that's the word we've used anyway. But yeah, that's basically how we do it. And now we're looking at turning that rūruku, or that acknowledgement, into a more teatea, which is like a almost like a chant. And that was, as far as I know, that was how we would pass on the knowledge. to the next generation, because we don't want it to be lost. We want to show, generations down the line, this is how we went about this, and this is why we do it. So we're going to turn it into a chant, and then that should hopefully tell the story of about how we got to here, and that will be learned in 8 weeks. Hopefully not by me, because I'm the worst at learning things, but I'll just put it on what is it, like Spotify, and loop that shit in the car. But yeah, bro, that's our acknowledgement.
How did you feel when you heard the acknowledgement, Jasper?
That was beautiful. It made me want to think about how can we acknowledge our nation as well. Is there a way I can acknowledge the Philippines, spreading out to Australia as well? I think that was so beautiful. And I was just thinking, while we are here to remind us of culture, we're also creating that culture for the next generation as well. And they're also developing their own, characteristics and things that they're picking from the current culture, from the old culture, and trying to make it something else, right? Making something that they can find respect in or honor in. And I think that was so beautiful.
Thanks, bro. I think, for me, it's how can we get, that's that old saying that lead the horse to water. That's the same with our next gen, is how can I create the best looking water? How can I make them see that because I remember when I was younger too, I didn't always think like how I thought, now, and I didn't hold culture nearly as as sacred as I do now. I took it for granted, so I'm trying to, how do I make this aruruku, which is, it's just words, uncle. It's just, it's just a thing I've got to learn on a Sunday. Geez, what do I have to learn this into? This holds, a massive amount of history and mana, what we call, really, really strong essence. How do I teach that? And now it's really awesome being able to hear our next gen get up and say that. Or go to a cultural awareness training and go, I know about that thing, or go to a First Nations Australian event and be comfortable and not be in the space of what's going on here, and why are these people yelling at this? It's like they have an understanding, or they have, and sometimes they have better understanding than me, which is awesome. But it's how do I make culture really attractive to them, so they can take it faster than I did, learn it quicker than I did. Yeah.
So I'm very keen to hear about your journey to your acceptance, not just acceptance, but onto capturing it and thriving, and now sharing this with the rest of the community. Because you made a small point earlier that you were not regretful, but not ashamed, but you didn't embrace it as much as you could. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. For me, it's so interesting because I'm in a place that has, the oldest living culture, as far as I know it. And one of my bloodlines comes from the youngest living culture. So Maori, or don't fact check me. I'm just saying it. So I believe it to be true. So it's true. But so in terms of my history, my mother comes from an Irish and English background. So Courtney, and then O'Haley or Healy, and her great grandfather was actually born in Nam. So immigrating over, was born here. And so in terms of our whakapapa or genealogy, some of our blood has been shed on this land, which is why I think I found it so much easier to live in Melbourne than any other place in Australia that I went to. Yeah. This probably helps that it's an awesome ass city and there's so much cool stuff here. But I've sort of believed that, I've shared some space here back in my lineage, so I feel a little bit safer here. And then on my father's side, and when my last name comes from Tuala, that comes from his father, Louis Tuala, and he took his mother's name after his mother and father divorced. So our, is it paternal? Is that the father line? Paternal father line name is Tumanuval, and my maternal name through my dad's line is Tuala. And Tuala is like one of those like Nguyen Smith. That's like one of the names. And so when I go to like, I remember I used to go to like the clubs and show my ID, and like Samoan bouncers would be like, like looking at me like, bro,
are we related?
You like, how are you at Tuala? You look nothing like So like physically don't really look like Samoan, but then my Maori friends would probably say, you look like a Samoan to us. And so this is where that sort of, not black enough to this way, not white enough to be this way starts to come in. But so that's my as far as I know, Lotofanga is a village in Samoa where that line comes from. And then my mother's name is Pirini or Pirini, and that comes from a place called Pauringa, New Zealand. And if you ever get to go to the beautiful valley, the luscious valley of Pauringa, Whangape Harbour, we're the first marae, we're the first village on the left, which is Morihu. And then there's Ohaki and Taiao down the road. And so that's where my Maori side comes from, if you'd like.
Horaki, you said, like bow.
Oh, so Ohaki is the name of the marae, but Bo, I think he's like one harbour down. That's right. I can't quite remember where he's from, but he wouldn't be too far away, and I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere down the line we've split off from the same tree somewhere. Yeah. They kept the lines pretty tight up north, which is a bit of an ongoing joke with our community. Yeah. And there's some of my family have married quite closely between our different iwi or hapu or mobs. But yeah, so basically that's where my lineage comes from. But my mother and father, had me in Auckland, which is our Sydney, so our sort of biggest city. And my father's mother, so two gens from me, were part of the generation in Aotearoa that had that sort of moving from the village into the city. I can't quite remember what that word is, but that sort of assimilation maybe into the Auckland city. And then from there probably would have been the first, my dad was the first of our community, of our family to lose that language. So that language was probably lost at him. And then I was, I'm an only child that we know of. And so I was brought up sort of in that first 6 years in Auckland, then moved down to Napier for the next 10, and then moved down to Wellington for 3, and then over to here for the remainder. And my life was basically brought up around that English / a little bit of Māori, a little bit of Samoan, but very, broken. There's that native speaker, to me, there's mega break in the language there. So breaking the language, breaking the culture. From what I've seen of New Zealand, or should I say sort of Aotearoa culture, who holds it, like who holds their culture really well. From what I saw when I grew up, our valley was really hit hard with the effects of colonization. And so where you might see some marae with, massive amounts of people and massive amounts of speakers, of native speakers, and song and haka and all these different things really held really tightly. I didn't see that when I was growing up, and we would always go back for, reunions or tangi or funerals. And whereas when I went down to the coast and I saw how they did it, how they did our culture, they held it in they had a lot of a better understanding throughout their whole community. And so I started realizing, I was like, there's different levels to sort of how much we knew up home versus how much is known down here. And now what's been amazing is ever since probably before this, but I shouldn't say this at all, but like ever since the settlement of our claim, the explosion of our iwi and support has been amazing. Like there's, we're getting information back, with the ability of having like Zooms and stuff, we're now able to learn more and more and more about who we are, who our mob was, who our iwi was. But there have been people in our valley that have fought for our culture for like ever since I've been alive.
Yeah.
Like for you know, there were groups that were put together and they were learning songs, and there was CDs and videos and stuff for years. So I'm not saying that they haven't done their job, because we're lucky that they've done their job to be able to keep it. Because if you've ever been to Paoringa, you'll see it's not like a bustling metropolis by any means.
Yeah.
But for them to have been able to keep the marae there, keep the language strong, keep our culture alive, would not have been easy from that area that far up from Auckland. And now we've got young ones like one of my cousins and aunties that are like, you know, doing events and bringing people home and creating accommodation and support services. That's so cool. So I hope at some point I'll be able to take what I've come out and learned and bring it back and give it back to my iwi and you know, play my part. Just don't know what that part is yet. But in that growing up from Auckland to Napier, which is Ngāti Kahungunu, is that area, sort of East Coast, North Island, Hawke's Bay, which is where that wine's from. That area, I started learning. I started my journey. So I sort of was like, I want to learn about this part of who I am. My dad was in the army for a fair few years, so he always knew how to do a haka, or he knew stuff, but he didn't know anything about language or about tikanga or kawa guiding protocols or principles. And so I learned that at school, and I'm probably the first generation that was lucky enough to have like a Maori teacher. Like there was a Maori studies, there was like a Maori class. And, you know, from what that was then to what they have in schools now is like huge. And it's only been like, how old am I? 32. So 17 years. So in 17 years, and this is what I'm telling a lot of First Nations people here, in 17 years, you will not know how much this thing will blow up in your country. It's unbelievable. You know, like we were part of the first groups at Napier Boys High School that relearned, you know, songs. Now we've got fully immersion schools from like, you know, babies to university. You know, like that's crazy to me that was a thing. When I went to university in New Zealand, there was like, you know, Maori support groups. Now there's Maori universities. Wow. Like that's how quickly it changed. But yeah, so my journey, I would say, started off very like shallow, you know, learning just songs, learning a little bit of language at school. But then I got sort of chucked in that I just wanted to surround myself with it. So I jumped into performing arts groups, and that's how I basically learned. They'd take us away for weekends. You know, just like sort of like footy, you're training all the time with them. So you're starting to learn what to do, what not to do. Yeah. All those sorts of little nuances you would never get anywhere else. You learn it in performing arts or in service of something. So the performing arts group or kapahaka, Ropua group that does haka or does song and dance, generally they will then not only do song and dance for competition, but they'll also help at different villages or marae, as we would probably call them. So you're learning language, you're learning dance, you're learning tradition, you're learning all these sorts of things, and then you're learning how to care for community as well. The dishes, like, you know,
all the support staff,
that sort of stuff.
Keep people fed, keep people housed, all of the things.
All of the things, you're learning that. So that's when I really started learning. Got really amazing support in Kahungunu through the likes of Te Rere Kotuku, which is one of the main groups from there, and one of their leaders just passed quite recently. But then I moved down to Wellington, and I met who's an AFL person. Like Buddy Franklin. Like the Buddy Franklins of performing arts were all in the same place at the same time. And I met them all. And then I was the only one with a full license. So I become the driver. And so I reckon that the biggest reason why I'm deep in my culture at the moment is because I had a full license. Because I got to drive everyone everywhere. So I was driving people that were, you know, at the forefront of pushing for like, you know, Maori culture, law, language, performing arts. around to parties, and I got to mingle with everybody and talk to everybody. And that's how I sort of learned how to talk in different areas and different people. And it probably took me out of my comfort zone, and I met different cultures. And that's how I sort of got to where I'm at now, as I started realizing how much culture matters and how much our guiding principles or Maori tikanga can keep you safe in, like, no matter where you go. So that's when I was like, oh, this is something really good to learn. And I ended up flatting with 2 people that really knew this, and they would just basically talk to me in Māori and fully immerse me, taught me how to cook really well as well. And then basically from those 2 people fully immersing me in culture and not letting, pretty quiet at the table at sometimes, because I didn't fully know my language at that point. That's how I learned the real foundation as to who I was and what skills Māori have, from surviving, from integrating, from being very clever, what skills I can use in a work sense, and how I can travel and work and make money and provide for myself using culture. That's how I started. And then I came over here, came over to Melbourne in 2011. Basically came off of a Skype call. Skype call.
You came in to play footy, right?
Well, this is the thing, right? So I was flatting at the time, and there was one of the girls that I was flatting / seeing at the time had a brother who was up there in the NRL, was now our first div coach in Canberra. He also had his own scaffolding company, and probably because I was, stapled to this girl's side at that time, they probably looked down at us and saw these 2, struggling little people, and said, "Hey, come over here, here and, work for us, play for us, da-da-da." And I was like, "Yes, sir. Like, I've got, $0 to my name. I'll come whenever you need me." Flew in, got a job, got a place, with the rugby crew, and that started my journey, and just, being able to be looked after by a whole bunch of guys that, wanted to see me do well. It was amazing. It was probably the best thing that's happened to me, in terms of my luck here in Australia. Got set up with them. I ended up moving up to Sydney for a year, or just under a year, and then my cousins were working for a organisation that was just opening in Melbourne, that was over in Perth, and they were shutting down their stores and opening an online store, and they just said, "Hey, do you want to come down and work with us for a bit?" I was like, "Yep, that'd be cool. I want to be in Melbourne." That's how I got down to Melbourne.
But your story and your journey is so incredible, and what I love about it is the reflections and deep learning and uncomfortability in embracing your culture. Doing that has allowed you to really, it seems like a spiritual connection with culture. It seems like it's your guiding light, your guiding principle, that when you have nothing left, you still have your culture. And because of that, you're able to recognize the significance of culture all around you as well. And especially, and I'd love to hear more about it as well, is your work with the First Nations Australians. And from your learnings as an Indigenous man of New Zealand, or Aotearoa. Am I pronouncing that right? Aotearoa.
Aotearoa. So
Aotearoa.
Yeah, beautiful. That's on. So it was funny to me, and this is why I say, like, I'm understanding more and more about our culture, and the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, we are so cool. I just think to myself, I'm like, this is so cool, but it's so much common sense. Like, it's not even like people's, now that I implement culture in my day-to-day processes or my work life, people are like, that's an amazing process or amazing structure. I'm like, this is not breakthrough. This has been done for 1,000 years, maybe. And we're a young culture, and I get like this is what I'm doing is not something that I've made up, or I'm just utilizing something that's been given to me through my genes, through my blood. But it's funny with the First Nations community here. As Maori back home, we have a very clear understanding of who we are, what our relationship to the land is, and what different sort of protocols or guidelines should happen when someone comes to our land. So, you'll see it in New Zealand Airport, you'll see it in, or Auckland Airport, I should say, or when the First Nations NRL All-Stars went over, or like the Queen comes, or the King comes over, or something. You'll see that there's protocols that are done, but then a lot of us will come over here and we won't do it, or we won't even question. Like, probably that they'll probably have something similar here. And so when I first took on the chair role at our not-for-profit organisation, I was like, what are we doing with our community here, and what are we doing with the First Nations community? And there was pretty much zero happening. Like, we weren't really engaging with First Nations communities here. I think we had a good enough understanding and respect for the land that we weren't doing, going out of our way to be disrespectful. But there was only really a couple of us that were actually actively pursuing a real acknowledgement or true connection to the land and the people. And it was Jeremy Nikura, which you might have come across now. He's actually working for the Victorian Electoral Commission now, supporting First Nations to become enrolled and to vote on, which is an amazing piece of work. But I went out to them first. So I went out, I asked them for a meeting, and they were pretty reluctant to meet with me at the time. There's a lot of, so that word of lateral violence between our organisations at that point. At that point of our history here. And I went in there, had a talk to them first, and basically they were saying, we should really, if we're going to see eye to eye, we should all come together as organisational leaders, rangatira in some of our own aspects, or some of our own words, and make a commitment. And so we all gathered. We invited all the groups, the active groups at the time, to meet at, I can't remember what this church was. It was a pretty interesting church. I'm not too sure what sort of church it was, but we met there. We talked about where we want to see ourselves going. And we talked about how do we as groups commit to putting First Nations people of this land first, because we would expect that if someone was to come to our land. And so we basically wrote up, we're going to do this. We're going to start everything with acknowledgement. With Ruruku, we're going to basically give us a list so we can start putting it into practice. And that was the start. And that was in 2019. And so we committed to doing that. We're committed to making sure that the protocols and guiding principles of the First Nations people would come before ours, which is awesome. And then we went and performed with the Jerrys at Fed Square to lock it in.
Fantastic.
So they smoked us out. Then we went back and forth. We did a bit of, they sung and danced, we sung and danced, and it was just a public show to say, we're doing this, and we're not, almost in a way of, hey, what we were doing before, can we get a pass? can we get forgiven for that? And then, can we work on this better? And so that's what happened. We basically went, and I like to think of First Nations Australian culture looking down on us, being like, they're just the younger brothers that are messing about. They'll come to realization soon enough. Now we put that first. So we try to make sure that we're doing those. We're trying to make sure that we're doing everything that we would expect of someone who's living on our land or engaging with our community with them. I can't say that's for everyone in our community. There's a fair few of us, but our organisations will do our best to, at those times, do everything we can. In that space, you'll see a lot of groups turn up to protests, to marches, to stuff like that. You won't see things as well, things that we do sort of behind closed doors to go and support or to share or to, try to, for example, we had the guy that sort of started all this, Jeremy, he took a group back to, one of our most historically significant places this year. Those sort of things you might not get to see, which is a pity, but those are those intercultural exchanges, which are amazing. We had, Auntie Caroline Briggs and Auntie Esmeralda Bamblett meet with the guy that translated our ruruku to talk about treaty, you know, and those sorts of things are like priceless. I was just sitting there in awe. But those are the things that we're doing at a community level to show that ongoing commitment and to pay the rent, I guess, in our own way, to share culture, to help any First Nations communities that may be going through something that we might have been going through like 80 years ago, 80 to 40 years ago, sort of depending on that. And the work that I'm doing at the moment with the Jajawarang of majority, it's so beautiful to see, because like I'm like, well, we're at the point where my dad's generation was at. Like, this is the point here where they're starting to take, you know, land. You know, they're getting the rights back. They're making decisions for their communities that are gonna, like, you know, build the foundation for another, you know, X amount of thousands of years. And so that's really cool to be a part of, because like we just missed it. We were just able to bath in the benefits of the hard work. Not saying that the fight's over, but that's where we're at the moment. It's, and that commitment since 2019 has pretty much shaped our organization and our groups to a point where we can feel comfortable to actually practice what we do.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I went, you know, this is how ignorant I was when I first started. I went in and I was like, hey, can we do like a thing where like we teach you some of our language, you teach us some of your language, and we'll like, just because because in my head I'm going, there's all this language here and I don't know how to say it. So that's like disrespectful. Let's learn. And they're like, no. And I'm like, why not? Like, why wouldn't you want to? And they're like, we don't have the command of our language. And I'm like, oh shit, okay. Yeah. What is this? Like, how don't you? And then that's got my head going into a deeper understanding. And now that I understand it, I get to sort of, you know, for lack of a better word, promote cultural understanding through one specific clan or one specific mob. I've learned that the desolation of certain groups was to an extent that we can't understand. Yeah. And so now I'm like, wow, I've got so much more understanding than when I was in 2019. And now I get why we couldn't do those things in 2019. I'm like, okay, I get it now. So from 2019 till today, we will still maintain our commitment and continue that no matter what. But it's now we're realizing we just have to just be there. We can't really do anything, which is the same thing that I reckon back in the day, our community probably said the same thing. Just come with us. Just come along for the ride. Because we've got to learn, and we've got to be able to, we've got to learn from everyone around us, which is amazing. Learn from us Maori, learn from, you know, Turtle Island, learn from Hawaii, learn from all these other places that are going through it. And the oldest culture might be the last to, I don't know what you'd call it, get to a point of complete reconciliation.
That's the word, right?
Yeah. They might get to a point where they feel like they are at that level, but they'll be better off for it because they would have learned from all of our mistakes. Yeah. So I say to people, man, just take your time. You got time, man. You got time to really understand what all these things mean, and you know. But then at the same time, treaty, voice, you know, RSAs, native title, trying to get it back really, really quick. But yeah, there's been, oh man, that's a whole nother story. But it's just beautiful to be able to be in a position where we can influence our community. We can open their eyes to being able to see what land they're on. Yeah. You know, where they're renting, where they're buying houses, where they're raising their children. And some of our elders have actually taken us to spaces around here that had, you know, Maori had came, you know, early. Yeah. And been in crazy things like prisoners of war or mining or, you know, warfare. We're a part of this country's history as well, but most of our community don't even know it. So, yeah.
I find it so fascinating because your perspective comes from an Indigenous perspective, the first people of your land. And so my family and Jasper's family and Gerald's family, we're migrants. We come from refugee backgrounds and migrant backgrounds. So hearing your connection to culture is just so inspiring. Because when I reflect back on my Vietnamese heritage, I know very shallowly that my mum's side was in the north of Vietnam for 8 generations.
8 generations, that's all.
That's all, exactly. And to me, I was like, wow, we're there for 8 generations, right? But all I know is the recent history that my grandparents went through. And before that, it's very grey to me. So my parents or my grandparents migrated from the north of Vietnam to the south in 1954.
True.
And that's in Operation Passage to Freedom. So they were escaping communism, and 1 million Vietnamese Catholics escaped the north of Vietnam to the south in large French cargo ships.
Wow. That's crazy. That's
Escaping
awesome.
communism, yeah. But they landed there and war was ever present. And communism was spreading from the north down to the south, and eventually in April 1975, we call it Ngày mất nước, meaning the day we lost our country.
1975.
To communism, yeah. And so from there, it was realizations and journeys from my family and millions of other Vietnamese people and the diaspora now is that we can't live here anymore. We have to go because there's no hope here. Hence
That's unbelievable.
Hence the big migrations, the boat people, and really changing the face of Australia.
1975. That's not long ago.
And in the 80s, yeah. And that migration wave, and I feel, and I'm biased, but I think Vietnamese people have contributed so much to Australia. And we are a multicultural success story as well. And
do you know how many you guys are?
Here in Australia?
Like the numbers, yeah.
No, I don't know the numbers, to be
What
honest.
about Vic?
Victoria?
Yeah.
Great question.
Right,
But
we'll
I know
look that up. We'll put that on the link.
but I know our communities are in Footscray, Sunshine, St. Albans, Springvale, Richmond, right, are the pockets of where traditionally people go, oh, yeah, you go there to get Vietnamese food, right?
Yeah.
But there's more to it as well.
What were those areas? Are they industrial? What are those areas?
Had a lot of government commission housing.
Commission housing.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the history there. And as we have this journey, as we're able to reflect on the podcast, it's just inspiring to speak to my parents and connect in a different way to uncover their stories and to draw it out even more. And so I've been doing work to uncover this, but I'm also curious for yourself, Jasper, your Filipino heritage as well, because hearing Tyson speak about country, connection and culture, it's his North Star. He's using it to fuel the work that he's doing each and every day. And a question for you, and we'll get to that after Jasper, is people are inspired, and I see you draw your culture into the way you communicate, in how you email and how you answer the phone as well. It's all drawing from your historic culture, right? So have a think on that, and then we'll hear from Jasper's reflection.
Man, I actually feel a bit ashamed because like hearing you guys talk about your culture and your knowledge behind it, I'm like, damn, like I know nothing about our culture. And it makes me want to do a deep dive. Like, what is the history behind the Philippines? Like, what was the story of my parents? What's their family story, right? It might not be as, sacred or as romantic as it might sound, but like everyone's gone through a journey of some sort, right? And yeah, like I think I'm being exposed to, because of starting our business, to the Philippine community and being a part of these events. Like it's so great to be around our people, right? And just supporting each other and hearing their stories. It's like, hey, how'd you start your business? I was like, blah, blah, we came from Philippines and, we wanted to start something. It's like, that's incredible, right? And I'm thinking like, fuck, how can we be more part of our community, right? I don't think the Filipino community is as big as like the Vietnamese community or, other cultures, but it'll be amazing to see if like we can share more of those stories and really see like, what's the history of the Philippines? Because I know nothing about it.
Yeah.
I don't think the word should be ashamed. I think you should feel okay that wherever you are at in your journey and using the inspiration to uncover more, to find that connection. So
in some ways, like you'll probably laugh at this. It's probably like, I'm probably a little bit jealous of you. Because once you start,
it's a rabbit hole.
I'm telling you,
it's
another level. Like you, it's one of those things where like, you get to, now if you go home and you start learning about these things and you start realizing the thing you just thought was normal is actually because you're Filipino. It's because of your cultural history or your genetics or your the lived experiences of all that blood being passed down to you. You'll start going, oh, that's why I do the things that I do this way. And I'm jealous because I remember those like epiphany moments and they're so cool. Like they are so cool. And now that I'm getting less and less, I'm like, whenever I get one of those little moments where I'm like, that's why I do this. That's the reason why. One of those epiphany moments was we talk about engagement all the time, through work and, what's our process of engagement or what's a model or what's best practice. And it took me, how many years now? 32 years to realize that, Maori have one of the best process of engagement structures, because if we didn't follow it, you could die. That's the biggest risk. The biggest risk is you and all your people might die. So why wouldn't we look back at our cultures and look at what process did they use? And now, with the help of some of my sort of cultural mentors and role models, I use like one of our oldest processes, porphyry, our welcoming ceremony, to basically run any process of engagement that I do or any research that I do. And I'm lucky enough to be doing a remote bachelor at the moment on Māori performing arts. And you're doing Māori performing arts. The first paper you do is about porphyry, is about welcoming, is about the process of engaging another group, another person. And it isn't, making up a social media flyer and sending it out. It isn't that. So, that's why, you're going to learn some things about your culture and about your history that you're just going to go, bro, like that's so common sense. And that's so me. And this is why I treat people like this. And this is why it's been built into me that I do these things. And when you figure those things out, you just get more confident. You get to a point where you realize, man, these things that I was unconfident about, less confident about before, they float away. And the thing, starting with meditation, we start with like karakia, like it's a prayer, like and so, sitting in that, I'm like, cool, this is just like what we do, but a little bit different, and it's no longer a thing of like, oh, what am I thinking about? Like, who's watching me? Can I do this? Can I not do this? I'm just like, cool, this is a new thing. Like, let's go. Whereas before, if I had, when I first came over here, I'd probably be feeling really uncomfortable and like, oh crap, like, what am I doing? What am I doing this for? It's like, no, I understand now that, culture supersedes everything and is up and upholds everything. Culture is the way we do the things we do. Yeah. So, and that's one thing, and if you say, oh, I don't know about this or that, you don't know about this or that, but you do your culture. You just do it no matter what. Your culture will, like my culture here, the Māori culture that I am, plus my Samoan side, plus my Irish and English side, that's not the same culture that was, 1200, 13th century New Zealand, it's always evolving. It's always going to be changing. But the principles that you learn from looking back about how they did things, the concepts you learn, you can bring them into your day-to-day life now. And that gives you that like solid foundation where a degree might give someone in youth work that solid foundation or a piece of legislation or a policy. The cultural policy that I carry around with me keeps me mega safe, like mega comfortable wherever. And also gives me the right to go away from anything.
Yeah.
So even though we have a commitment to First Nations people, or personally I have a commitment to any cultural person that I come in contact with, which means every person, if we get unsafe, we can leave. We can break any rule to leave.
Okay.
Because safety is the most important thing. You know, safety, your lineage, your life, your tribe, safety is number one. You know, one of the tribes from my area lit their whole village on fire to escape. You know, so they're called Te Au Pauri, the sad smoke. And so when they were warring, they knew they had to get out. And they lit their whole village, their whole life on fire so that the valley would be flooded with smoke so they could leave. So if that doesn't tell you enough about safety, that's the sort of thing that I'm learning now. Okay, you know, if I'm not safe in a meeting, what do you mean I can't leave? You're kidding me. You know, if I'm not safe in an online space or in this podcast, like I'll leave. Like there's no thing making me, you know, I've got to stay here because of this reason or that reason. And so all those little cultural policies that you'll learn from your Filipino side or from whatever side you come from, you learn from, will just add to your ability to walk through life more confidently. Wow. That's it.
So there's a couple of elements to safety then. There's physical safety, there's mental safety, but now you're introducing to us, but I guess we have already realized that we just haven't put a word to it, which is the cultural safety.
Cultural safety.
And like, this is the other thing we were talking before with this, there's like a spiritual safety as well that I fully believe in. You know, it's going to take time. I think some science is already sussing it out now, but you know, that sort of intergenerational DNA, you know, stuff that gets handed down to you, the lived experiences of your ancestors getting handed down. I fully believe that now. I can't quite put it into words at the moment, but there'll be some people that I'll meet that I genuinely know I don't like. There's something about them that makes me really uncomfortable. There's something that they're saying that's giving me a real, you know, I can feel an anxiety or an anger or a frustration. And even to the point where I've heard a First Nations instrument being played here before, and it immediately made me just like gear up as if I'm going to play rugby. And I was like, oh, there must have been something back in the day between like a tribesperson, like my ancestry and this instrument, because I've heard heaps of different cool ass, beautiful instruments. You know, we go down to like, what's the word? Diaspora, like a diaspora fair, and we're hearing like just different sounding instruments, and I'm loving them all. And then I just hear this one First Nations instrument, and I'm like, oh, what's that? So now I'm like, okay, cool. There must be something in our cells and, you know, energy, vibration, what else they call it, you know, all those sorts of things that holds memory deeper than what we remember in our own lives. But that's what we do. So in that process of engagement, porphyry, generally speaking, it'll start with a woman's karanga, so a call. And what that call does, and this is, you know, anecdotal, so there's many different mobs believe many different things in terms of this call, but it's a way to open the spiritual realm up. And in some of those calls, the kai karanga, the person performing the karanga, will ask our ancestors and their ancestors to meet before we meet. And so we'll call out, to them, and then they'll reply. But before we actually meet face to face, we're asking the people in our spiritual realm to meet and to discuss and to prepare this process so that we're all safe. So there's that spiritual safety, the cultural safety or understanding, and then we start the process of talking. So, you know, this was a perfect way to open up for me. I was like, cool. Like, I'm like meditating, like asking my ancestors, hey, can you just sort me out real quick? check these guys out, you know, and I haven't felt anything, you know, anything ever bad in between us. And it can be like such a small thing like that, you know, hey, you're going to open a space without, you know, getting straight into it. And our process, the word manakitanga, or like caring for. So showing that you care for someone, not just like, hey mate, so we're going to talk about your job, like, you know, get into it straight away. It's like, how can we how can we talk about, like, make each other feel cool before we actually get into it? So having you do that, I'm like, cool. That's a cultural custom that we do. We always try and make that person feel safe. We always try and bring a gift. We try to do something.
Yeah.
So when you find out the stuff that the Filipinos do, you're going to just like have more and more in your back pocket. And then I firmly believe the better you understand your culture, the better you're going to perform in business. Because at the end of the day, this Western idea of business of, you know, I've got to rise to the top. I've got to be at the top no matter what. That's starting to crumble, and it's starting to degrade, and it's starting to show up. You know, people at the top are starting to get, you know, they've put business and money in front of relationship. And now you know, what, you watch anything on YouTube, the top of the top people at the moment, they're all turning back to relationships now. You know, how can I make the best relationship with these people? You know, people aren't going to work for you if they don't like you now. It's, you know, people are saying, oh, we've got no workers. I'm like, I know why, without even talking to you. So you're going to, I firmly believe if you can bring culture into your own space and then filter that into whatever you do in your life, you're going to be better off.
Thank you for saying that. Like, I feel excited to search and discover what our culture has, right? And the history behind the stuff. And when you talk about it, it sounds more, when I think of culture, I think of it just at this surface level, but you bring such a spiritual, sacred connection to it. And I'm just like, I feel a bit like a goosebumpy when you talk about it, because I'm just like, wow, this is much deeper than we realize. And yeah, just thank you for sharing. And I'm just so excited, man.
That's sweet. I love talking about it. People, it's funny. This is the other thing too about like refugee, migrant, people that have come from significantly hard, like stuff that we can't even understand hard. Like you'll notice, and that's why how I determine like privilege is like, if I feel uncomfortable, it means I've been affected by some sort of privilege. But if we can laugh about it, it means we've shared it. Like that's my thing. Like I'm like, if I'm with you and you're laughing about it and I'm laughing like, oh, it's funny that you feel ashamed, but you're gonna kill it when you learn it. You're gonna kill it and we laugh about it. It means that we're both in that space. But if you say something like, you know, it's the communist sort of thing, I'm like, damn, like I'm like, oh, that sucks. Like that's harsh. But at the same time, I'm sitting there going, that's funny because that's exactly what happened to us. Like that wave of like, you know, because I wonder, like this is the same thing with me. And I think there's some things in your culture that will always be I hope will always be a mystery. Like why did Maori end up in Aotearoa? You know? Because I'm like sitting there like, have you been to the Cook Islands? Have you been to like Tahiti? Have you been, like those places are freaking amazing. You know, how did we end up coming through this area and ending up in Aotearoa, New Zealand? You know, what did that mean? And like, for me, I'm like, there must have been something like that. Like there must have been a reason for us to go, this place isn't good. Let's go somewhere else.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah. Hey, there had to have been something because, you know, what would get someone to move from the land they love that they've been brought up on? Other than just pure, you know, there's always those people out there that just want to go explore. Like I get that, but to move in a massive migration, to move from a really warm, beautiful area, part of the world, to move to somewhere that's not like that, and then to stay and set up roots and to indigenize the space and themselves. I got questions. You know, there's talk about a volcano at that time, cooling. Having a massive cooling period. I don't know what you know that far back, but that's why I can share. I'm like, oh, it's funny, but it's not funny to me. It's like it's funny that we've ended up in this space from a massive amount of like violence and hatred, but now we're sitting on the couch and we're like talking about all this like cool shit. Like that's what makes me laugh. It's not the fact that we had to go through those terrible places, but I'm also so happy that I get to laugh now. Like they've done all the work, they've done the hardship, they've built, you know, And this is why I think my parents, like, their tenacity must be ridiculously, and their resilience must be way higher than mine.
Yeah.
Because I can't stay in a job for like more than 2 years.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But my dad could work 12-hour days every day of the week and be like fine. And that just blows my mind.
Right.
Like, how could they do that? Like, like, how did they have that strength and resilience to maintain that to the point where now I can go here and work here, and go this here and try this thing and have all these opportunities? So for me, it's like, I've come from I've got to acknowledge where I've come from and the strengths and the weaknesses of my cultures that have seen me get to this point. But now how can I implement the things that have managed to last this long, and grow them and evolve them and try harder? Because I feel like that's my responsibility. Like, why else? How else would I go through this world other than taking on what I've learned or what has been passed down to me?
Yeah.
If I'm not going to then do that for someone else. So, I'm lucky enough to have kids. I'm going to do as much as I can possibly do in the time that I have to make sure that they have more opportunities than I did. Or opportunity to succeed more than I have. So I reckon, man, you're gonna.
It's so fascinating.
I'll be keen to listen to what you find out.
Yeah,
in time.
dude. I can't wait. I'm ready to just go on Google and just start searching anything, talk to my parents, and like, this is crazy.
But
It's
you
so
guys,
exciting.
you see, I mean, Filipinos have I would say probably have a better infrastructure than us here.
Really? Why do you think that?
Because you have physical, tangible infrastructure in Australia.
Right.
Restaurants. I want to say I've seen more. I would say there's more businesses, Filipino businesses.
Oh yeah.
Visible businesses, which is a thing. And I think that's where that citizenship stuff comes in. That opens doors that weren't there before for us. That creates safety, legislative safety, citizenship safety. That's a new one. In our community that wasn't there before. So I feel like this might change things for us. There are some Maori businesses or Kiwi, New Zealand businesses as well, but I know exactly where to go get Filipino food from.
True.
So then, if that's a what would you call that? Like a identifier, like a community strength identifier or something. Filipinos probably have that over us at the moment. That ability.
Yeah, because you're talking about the visa situation.
Yep.
It's the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy because it is your home, it is your shelter, it is that safety to have that home.
Yep.
But just going back to your point around your family and them making all the sacrifices and working long, hard, really unrecognized hours to hustle to create a home for you, to create a life, to afford you the opportunities and the freedom to go and explore what you want. So I'm having a lot of these conversations as well because, as you heard from my family, they snuck out in the middle of night to the river to jump on a boat, to pay people smugglers fingers of gold, like an ounce of gold.
True.
To the people smugglers, and they would take you out to sea to the bigger boat. And then from there, you would go on your journey for like almost a week, 10 days longer to unknown destinations. A Malaysian refugee camp, for instance, was where my mother ended. And you're talking about burning the village and escaping under smoke. They burnt their boat so that they couldn't be turned back.
That's wicked. That's the
you're,
real deal way.
You're on this boat with 150 other people. It's a small fisherman's boat and you wouldn't hop on that thing to cross any seas, that's for sure.
I wouldn't. I'm the worst. I'm like, nah. And where is that to Malaysia? Like, what's that distance looking like?
Well, my understanding is it's an area called Pulau Bidau. That's how my family call it. I've seen it on Google Maps, but I think a bit of my heart and my spirit wants to visit that, to feel the energy of that place.
That'd be a significant energy, that one.
I think so too. Yeah. It'd be a significant energy because of just the amount of Vietnamese people who have ended up there and were processed in that time. And there's common stories of Vietnamese people interacting with, I'm assuming, is the UNHCR at that time.
What's the?
It's the United Nations kind of body for refugees.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're helping processing and visas to allow the Vietnamese people to find their new home.
True.
Essentially from a sense of statelessness.
Yeah.
And so my dad was given the opportunity to go to Canada, America, or Australia.
Like, that's your 3 options.
Yeah. They had options at that point.
Great decision.
Incredible,
Great
right?
decision, Australia.
Canada, always, everybody would say, too cold. First thing they'd say, Canada's too cold. America was a funny one because of their involvement in the war as well.
Yep.
And so there's a sense of distrust. But given what they did, they had to take a large amount of people in. But Australia for him was a natural decision because the other 2 weren't good enough.
I love that.
Right?
That's
that because of their journey and this, we talk about privilege in so many different ways, right? People look at us as Indigenous, or the term these days is cold communities.
Oh, yeah.
Culturally
Love
and
cold.
linguistically diverse people, right? But they look at us as we've got so many gaps, which is true at the same time. But we talk together here is that we've got a privilege and a superpower in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need to morph and harness as a collective, because we do share similar backgrounds, although you have come from Indigenous backgrounds and because my family have come from a migrant background, we can still share and interact and connect in ways that some others can't as well. We've got that shared superpower between us, and that's how I like to refer to culture, and that's why I find so much energy having these conversations.
Yeah. Well, I laugh because I go, like, because there's a lot of, guilt from, normally it's Irish, English, Scottish, sort of that sort of what we would say, what my young ones call colonizer blood. And it's so funny because they say it to me all the time, like, say if we're out performing or something and then afterwards we need to go get something to eat or something, or I tell them they can't do something, they'll literally say to me, "Don't talk to me like that, you colonizer." Like I'm quite a fair Maori at the same time. But generally I'll see a lot of guilt, and it's funny to me because I'll tell, people that say, "I don't have culture," or "I'm just white," or whatever. I'm like, you guys had it probably the worst. Like we just have it the most recent. You guys were the first that were colonized. You had, really terrible conditions that you just don't realize. You don't realize that, your country was taken over at a time and you were bred into colonizing machines. Like they knew how to move you, and now you're feeling that guilt of years and years of people going and taking over countries, killing people. You're feeling that, you're feeling the screams, the anger, the hatred from, like, you have been subject to colonization way before us. We're just the most recent. We just hold it in the last couple 100 years. That's the reason why we can see it and feel it and do it. You've become blind or numb to what your own history is. I'm like, do you know the first colonizers were these people or this people, or you were colonized 3rd down the line and then we're 6th down the line from you, and then they don't even realize that. They're like, were we? I'm like, yes, you were taken over twice. And so what does that feel like? What happens to a person when their culture is bled out of them? It's taken away. Your little things were taken away from you and replaced with different beliefs, and now you're at this point where you feel like you have no culture. They did a really good job on you. They did the best job on you. They tried to do it here. They nearly got rid of everyone here. They nearly got, they tried to do it in Aotearoa. They tried to do it in Vietnam. They tried, and because of those people that are resilient, because of the nighttime on the boat. Oh, God, boats. I couldn't, not boats. But for me, it's like people have forgotten their own history. And because they've forgotten it, because they're numb to what has happened to them, they can't have that, that forgiveness. They can't forgive themselves. They can't forgive their countrymen. They can't sit amongst other First Nations people and be comfortable. And that's sad. And so when I talk about it to people that are trying to sit in a place of, I want to be culturally aware, I'm like, have you done your own? Oh yeah, we're Irish. What did the Irish do? Where's the Irish coming from? How do you know what happened? How do you know you're Irish? What have you done? And they're like, oh, I didn't even know. I'm like, well, then how can you learn about me? Like, like you got no idea about yourself, your own history, and I'm not talking about the last 100 years. I'm talking about go back 2, 3, 4. What was your country doing? Where were you as a people? And then you'll understand why you're at this point now where you are like freaking out when you're in a room full of different colored people and can't understand anyone. I'm like, because you've forgotten how to understand. You've forgotten how to listen properly. You've forgotten how to put other people first, which is, people think, oh, no, I've put them first. I'm like, have you really? Are you willing to, what do they call it? Bow down and show full and utter care for someone else other than yourself, to show respect to your own culture. If you can't do that, then you haven't fully looked at what you used to do. You can't have that that cultural awareness because you're just trying to learn cool things about another culture, rather than sit in yourself and go, what am I? Who am I? How am I feeling about this? Once you can get those questions done, you can learn you can sit with any culture in the world. And as long as you're not doing something completely wrong.
As long as you're not causing harm.
Yeah, as long as you're not causing harm, you're going to be pretty safe. There's going to be, someone's going to recognize in you that you are safe, and then they'll offer information to you to keep you safe. And that's how this world would work if we didn't have these preconceived ideas of we need to be this way or we need to feel this way. Just have to look back in ourselves, understand where we've come from, what we've lost, and then you can move forward. There's no point going forward until you've done that sort of stuff.
So I remember when I was in Pakistan, I attended and participated in the 5 p.m. prayers at the Great Mosque there in Islamabad. And the people that I lined up with, they found I get treated like a rock star in Pakistan because I visibly look different.
Yeah.
And then because of how the media paints their country to the Western countries, they're looked upon as bad people. And when I'm walking the streets there, they say, welcome to Pakistan. Why are you here? Thank you for coming to see us. And please go and tell your friends and family that we're good people.
True.
Right. And so when I'm lining up there to say the prayers and going through the process, standing up, sitting down, kneeling, each time I'm coordinating the movement with my breath, which comes back to the yoga practice that I've been cultivating for the last 10 years. And so that's a borrowed culture and tradition from Indian yoga practices, but also through Buddhism practices as well. But I'm keen to find out, when we did the meditation to open, you said that that was similar to a practice that your people do as well. I'm interested to find out more the relation between that, because to sit back in mindfulness, in presence of being, right? We sit here and we're consistently changing. Our bodies are pumping our blood through our veins. We are never stagnant. And that's why it's so beautiful to learn about the impermanence, that the good times and the bad times don't last.
No, they don't last. Doesn't matter how bad you feel. It will, what is it? It's that too shall pass. That's that thing. So for us, or for me anyway, there's a real beautiful resurgence of spiritual understanding in Maori culture in Aotearoa, at the moment, and where it's massive because it's reaching out everywhere because of Zoom, stuff like that. You can tap in Facebook Live, you can tap in, and all the way to like our traditional instruments, so that sound healing, breath work, Haka, Chant, all those sorts of things. We're always if you've ever heard a more te or waiata tawhito, an old song, or like this is me really messing up the translations of these words, but that is probably the real original sound of how we would have sung in order to maintain tradition, to maintain oral history, and that's in real, like, you know, Pene te kura, whanake te kura, I rauro ia warua. So it's like that real monotonous one or two notes, like different to like the singers of today, which are like all up in the heavens, and like but that meditation, that sort of stuff, I haven't really dived massively into it, but I can tell we bring that focus in. So whenever we do kapahaka, whenever we learn, we're doing breath work, we're doing, you know, how many breaths in, how many breaths out, timings of those breaths. It's you know, now we've got people back home that are doing guided meditation, guided understanding of the different spiritual places that we hold in our history, like the different heavens, the different spaces, the different realms. That's probably a better word, but I haven't done it yet, so that's something, you know, I'm still on my journey in terms of that. But I know that you know, you can sit in our wānanga or our level, you know, massive levels of learning, but then they do the real hardcore understanding training, but then it flows down for our community, and it might end with just us doing karakia, breath work for 5 minutes, and Haka for an hour and a half. So there's those massive different levels. But for me, karakia does that grounding, does that like, let's bring it back to who we are. Who are we again? Oh yeah, this is who we are. Who are we going to ask for help? Who are we going to ask to keep us safe? And that just, you know, realigns everybody. It's like sort of like that purpose statement, you know, like all that, like, you know, hey guys, here's our agenda for today. Like we're doing that to keep ourselves safe. But when I was in the meditation, actually took me back to when I was also about probably like 13 to 15, and we were at a Maori contemporary theatre group. Wow. And we were on like hard wooden surface, and I remember all my mates at the time there, this like, I remember she's like fully white lady, but she's working at a Maori contemporary art like thing, and she's like, we're going to do meditation guidance. And I can just remember the feeling of all of us just like trying not to laugh, and just that, you know, when you can't laugh and you're just like, it's just that ultra squeeze. And I was having a laugh to myself. I was like, man, like how far have I come from those kids that were like laughing and couldn't meditate for 2 seconds. To now where like, if you know, I could have just sat here all day and not said anything. But yeah, so for us, it's karakia, prayer, for lack of a better word. And then there's all these different levels of spiritual connection in the Māori world that I haven't stepped foot into yet. But I guess the main thing, for me is it just brings us, it allows us that opening. It shows us that we're not, it keeps our ego in check too. It's sort of like, you know,
it's humbling. Just
remember, like there's a life before and after this, and you know, there's these people in there that you know, we're gonna pray to, and we're gonna remind ourselves of where we've come from, or the processes that we go through. It's bigger than us. We're doing this for something bigger than us. That's probably the biggest thing, or the connection I have to it. But the breath is a major one for us. I mean, if you've ever seen us perform or haka, you know, you have to be able to breathe correctly and circulate that blood correctly. Otherwise you pass out. Just happened to a few of my friends on a few occasions. Happened at my wedding. And it's such a funny thing, and he's going to hate me for talking about this, but I'm not going to name him, so everyone will know who it is. But it's happened so often with me and him that like I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh cool, he's about to do this haka. He's going hard, and he starts passing out. I just start laughing, and like me and my mates that know him are like chilled out, and everyone else is like, "Oh my god, like is he okay?" We're like, he's fine. He just doesn't know how to breathe. He's like, useless. And we just have a mad laugh, and we just talk away, and then he like picks himself up, and he's all right. But there has been times where I was in one space. It's crazy. This one's a mad one. I was performing in line. It's about 40 of us. And I'm looking out, and one of our major like leaders here stood up and started performing back. And I'm like, awesome. Because when that happens, it's like,
battle.
It's funny because people think that.
Yeah.
But it's actually like, when you just, something's so awesome, you got to get up and like do a round of applause.
Yeah.
Like that's the feeling. Like you're like, I got to get up and do this with them. So it's so cool that my culture's been on show. So people will get up and we call it total core support. So it looks like a battle, but they're actually just saying, you're so cool. You made me get out of my seat. Like it's, so he got up and we're like, oh my God, starts having a heart attack mid performance. And I can tell because like there's about 3 of us that were working in the prisons at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that does not look good. And so like generally speaking, you do not break a haka for nothing except for safety. And the guy that passed out at my wedding, he didn't even break a haka when a dog was attacking him. Like a dog was attacking him and he just kept going. That's how hard he is. Because it was a funeral and he was going hard. This dog freaked out, thought something was going on and started attacking him and he just kept going. Didn't even stop this performance even though a dog was freaking attacking him. So we see this guy having a heart attack. And we just break formation like this. I start walking out. I grab my mate. My mate's looking at me mid-performance like, what the hell are you doing? Like you're breaking
You can't break it.
everything. And I'm like, come with me. This fella's having a heart attack. Went over, full-on heart attack. Get him out, put him in recovery, check if he's breathing, not breathing. Straight into CPR. This is like one of our biggest ever community events. And like, then I get like a tap on the corner and a shoulder. It's like, I'm not too sure what Asian background this dude was. I'm like looking at him like, what the hell do you want? He's like, I'm a doctor. I'm like, get in here. And so within about 5 seconds, we had like a doctor, then like a nurse came flying in. She's like in like ER emergency response, like smashed, done it out. He ended up standing up, got on the stretcher, even though he was told not to. He stood up. He's like, no, I'm standing up. Stood up, got on the stretcher, and we went. But that's the level of like, the level of
culture first
shit that happens with us. But that whole breath work is it's gonna be really interesting for me for the next sort of year because that's one thing that I noticed in our community. You talk about, working 9 to 5, working those long hours. That cycle is still very apparent today, even within myself, that cycle of like aggression, alcoholism, drug abuse, all that stuff coming from a lack of land, a lack of respect, a lack of rights as a people. That stuff's very apparent even in my generation. And it's trying to, that cliche of breaking the cycle. It's only being done at the moment through cultural understanding. For me, it's not working. I try to go to a couple of that Western route, but it didn't work for me. And so now I've gone through a Maori route, and it's working. So that's another part in terms of your yoga and your breathing. I'm highly recommend taking a global First Nations approach to healing over in some respects, a Western pharmaceutical approach.
Yeah.
But karakia, meditation, haka, all the same stuff for us. You said superpower before. My mate calls it, like, Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
That charging up.
Super Saiyan.
100%. I've seen it so many times. We're like, for lack of a better word, sometimes we may appear lazy. We may appear lazy or very chilled out or relaxed. But as soon as, one command from a leader can have the biggest haka I've been a part of was 1,200. 1,200 people doing it. 1,200 boys actually. And that for me, it was like, that's like fully, I felt like, Super Saiyan. And you can't remember it
fully
too.
Charged up. You're so into it. You're so in the moment performing. With no thoughts. It's just a pure flow state.
Flow state. That's exactly
it. But I've been looking into flow recently and it's effortless effort.
Oh,
how good is that?
That's on. I like that.
That's the way you put it.
Yeah.
But just pausing for a second, Jasper, how was your experience in the meditation today compared to last week?
I think throughout the whole meditation, I was reminding myself of this, that your thoughts that come through, like, it's okay to have that come through. And you mentioned it during the meditation, you're going to have these thoughts, just let them go by. And before you said that, I was like thinking about those things. And then when you said to see it in like a third person perspective and just let those thoughts through, I visually saw myself going out and seeing it as like a viewpoint of everything going through me, like I was watching something. And then when you start to really guide the conversation, I was visualizing everything, like the breath. I could visualize going through, like I was the breath in first person, going through my nostrils and going through my throat all the way down to my belly and exhaling out. And I just had to remind myself constantly that meditation is not like thinking of nothing and just to be in stillness. It's understanding that you will have these thoughts come through and it's okay, right? Just go back to the breath, let that ground you, and just be present in this moment. And that's where I was in this meditation today, just constantly reminding myself, hey, you're here today, you're in this serious position, you're doing this podcast right now, everything else doesn't matter, right? Like, let's focus. And yeah, that's where I was just like thinking, that's where my mindset was today. Yeah.
And it's beautiful to connect with the breath, isn't it? And so I'm fascinated about the Haka, but I'm also wanting to dive into how you got here in the first place, which is playing rugby, right? But before you jump into that, the community side of sports, because you come here and you said you met 40 blokes who immediately have become your best mates, right? The banter in the change rooms.
Unbelievable.
Incredible, right? And
quality.
I've started playing footy as well.
I've seen that.
For me, and arriving and just meeting 40 different blokes, and you have to learn how to trust each other very quickly, right? You learn how to suss somebody out just by the effort that they put in at training. Can I trust this guy on the field with me? If I go hard, will he protect me? Right? You learn about that. So essentially it feels like you're going to war together.
Yeah.
But from an outside perspective, when I see the All Blacks and they do their Haka, it's spiritual, it's special, but it feels like a war cry at the same time, right? Can you tell us about the practice in itself and your connection to sport and community in that regard?
I mean, just one more thing on the breath. I mean, we have this one thing I always like to talk about because it just brings awareness. Yeah. Because it can freak people out, especially after COVID. But we, generally speaking, in that process of engagement, that porphyry process, we will end with sharing a breath together physically. So we'll press our noses together, the hongi. Yeah. And so, you know, there's different stories around where that's come from. But generally speaking, the first woman was made from clay, was made from the ground, and the breath of life was breathed into her via the nostrils. So placing the head against the forehead and the nose against someone else, and then breathing in, so that you're physically sharing a breath together. And that is part of the process of going from, you know, so that first call into the spiritual realm, coming together, coming in this conversational realm or this war realm, and then coming together to hariru, or to be at peace with one another. Generally speaking, you'll see Maori people press their nose and forehead to one another, close their eyes. And in some ways it's beautiful because that's the most vulnerable state you can be in.
Absolutely.
As you know, closed eyes, head to head with somebody. But it's really, I didn't realize how weird it was until I came here. Because I'm like, this is just ABC to me. Yeah. But when I saw people reacting to me doing it to somebody, I was like, oh, weird. No one else really does something like this that I've seen. But then I notice other cultures have their own ways of doing these things. But yeah, so the breath work for us starts and always starts at the hongi, or the pressing of the nose and the forehead together. The Haka, in terms of the All Blacks, it's not just a spiritual thing, but I believe, and I think there's been some sort of research done on it. It gives us like a literal physical advantage, because if you think about preparing for a rugby game or any sort of physical, AFL, they warm up before the game. So in specific areas, the other team has to stand there in the cold,
And
not moving, and watch. And whereas we are warming up, competing, breathing at a higher, our blood rate is higher, our heart rate is higher, our blood is moving quicker. So straight after the haka and we go into the game, we're at a physical advantage. And so some group, like this is where coaches had actually complained, and some people thought, oh, they're complaining about our culture, But no, those coaches know that we're getting an extended warm up, and we're coming in roaring into a game where the other group has had to stand there still, and almost their blood, the different things in their blood, the different chemicals in the blood are going down where ours are going up. And so there's some coaches that I believe have recognized that and said, they'll leave their kit on, so they'll have their their tracksuit pants on. So straight after the haka, they have to go off and get changed, and it brings everyone back to sort of total.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
Yeah, in terms of the haka, that's gone through some pretty hard times in itself. In terms of taking on a culture that predominantly wasn't theirs at some points, and utilizing words that may not have been necessarily given the biggest respect to. That haka in itself, I remember hearing something really beautiful. For the life of me, I can't remember who wrote that now. I'm going to get shot for this. But Kamate in itself, it has other verses before, and I'm not too sure if there's anything after it. But there was a prediction by the person either that wrote that haka or someone around him at the time that his footsteps, his footsteps would be heard around the world. And now that it's heard around the world, physically out there, that was a goosebump moment for me. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like he knew that haka was going to go around the world. But that whole idea of challenge, putting, I liken it to, Troy, the movie Troy, and they send out one and one. We would always send out our best warrior first, and that first before the process of engagement of porphyry, and we call it a wera or a challenge. And I sort of see the All Blacks, or when I've performed the haka in a sports sense, as that as well. Like we are respecting you enough to put out a cultural challenge that has been done for centuries. But we are trying to show you that we are here to compete at the highest level.
Absolutely.
So that's where I see it as. I don't really see it as as much as like a generalization of a war cry or a battle chant. I think it's more than that. It's we're calling on the people that have gone before us, our genealogy, our whakapapa. We're calling on the land. We're calling on everything around us. And basically in that same respect, we're respecting the other person. To even give that to engage in that process. If they don't do it, then I would question, why not? Like I'd be like worried. I'd be like, shit, why is there no challenge here? What's going on? I'd be more worried. I'd be like, rather than seeing a full-on haka at me, because at least if I see that haka and I feel it, I'm like, okay, cool, we can go at it. We can go at it now. It's opened the right to fight, to compete. That's how I see it anyway. But in terms of community sport here, I low-key sometimes wish I didn't ever play rugby, because it's straight up addictive drug. It's like it's one of the, other than haka, which is probably the only place that I have seen other than death metal and sometimes it's techno raves, haka, death metal, techno, all those sorts of places are the only places where you are allowed to scream these days, are allowed to exert total energy through aggression, through controlled aggression, or through total
controlled chaos.
Controlled chaos. Those are some of the only places you can do that these days. There's no, if we just started screaming in here, people probably call the cops, you know what I mean? So like you can't really do that.
What's wrong?
Yeah. But on a field, the field is probably the last place now where you can physically hit someone as hard as you want. Exert that, that real dominant sort of energy to try and overcome somebody else's goal of beating you. It's probably why I find it so addictive, and probably why sport is seen as one of the best crime preventers. Because you're in a space where you get humbled very quickly and realize who you are, and if you're not part of a team, how very quickly you can get hurt or get singled out. So there's so many parallels I see between community sport and that village mentality, which is what I really loved about your post was, what happens on the day versus the preparation that's gone before it, the feed afterwards, the aunties that clip you on the ears if you're playing out, all those sorts of things happen, and that's why that whole village mentality around sport is so addictive. Gives people a place, especially if they come from overseas or come from a place that they're not used to. When I came to Melbourne, it's the first thing that I did, looked up a team, found Kiwi Hawthorn. I was like, cool, Kiwis, done. And you're there for that common purpose. You're going to put your body on the line for somebody else. You're making decisions throughout the week to sacrifice in order to be, help your friends be better. So all of those things are, I think they're one of the, and that's why, in terms of CMY, I went, that was some of the first funding I ever went for. Was, intercultural sporting opportunities. Because there's enough you learn real quick, about other people in a competitive environment. And then you also learn to respect other people in other sports really quickly. I played, I think, 6 games of Aussie rules. And recognized very quickly that I was not cut out for that. We had 4 boys that had played rugby at pretty significant levels. Went and did 2 to 4 weeks of Aussie rules training, and it was my first taste of like Aussie, what would they call it? Like work ethic. Work ethic for Aussie rules was a lot higher than I had experienced. A lot more running for sure. And then playing for that amount of time with that many people on the field in a multi-linear sort of play style. With the ability to kick on the run, with the ability to place body in certain positions. I just didn't have enough time. It's just too short a time to change my way of running through people and
running out of line into another.
Running lines and because that's the thing, when you know how to play a game, you don't have to be as fit. So we didn't know how to play the game and we weren't fit. So that's 2 things that you cannot be in AFL. We could run, but it's not. But getting back to the point, I feel like whenever I've competed against somebody or with somebody, it takes out that, it gives you a common goal, common focus, which is why I think Maori love to compete, because we will try and find ways to compete because it makes us both better. And so it's not about, I'm going to be better than you. It's recognizing that if we put a competition in between us, we will be better. Like we will have to be better. Well, if we have no competition, if there's 0 fear or anxiety or 0 anything, what reason is there to get up and learn? What reason is there to do? So I think that's probably a bit of a toxic trait. So I always chuck myself in the worst possible situations. What if I get in here? I see if I can, it's that throwing me into the deep end of the pool thing. But if I look back, if in any position, especially in rugby here in Australia, because you're coming from the jocks of Aotearoa New Zealand are the rugby players, the rugby guys. And, I'm sad to say it, but back in the day, if you weren't playing rugby, you were to the point of you're gay straight away. You're nothing if you're not playing first 15. If you're not, if you can't hit someone hard, if you can't play rugby, and so that mentality, although I don't support that anymore, I've grown up in that world of like, I have to be the best at this. I have to run. I remember crying, running with my dad, and my dad was on a bike and I was just crying and just running. And I was like now I'm like, it's built me into a really resilient person.
Yeah.
But at the time, I'm thinking, could I make my kid run?
It's like torture.
It's like torture. But now I'm like,
You appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it now. And now I don't have to run. I've probably put on a bit too much now, and I got my own kids. But my thought process around that is like, it's crazy. It's literally unreal how much this world has changed in 15 years. From rugby was the main thing, dancing was not a thing.
Yeah.
Now I professionally, or I've called it professional because we get paid to do it. But like I go and perform at like an ultrasound convention. Do you know what I mean? But that would have been frowned upon when I was young. We get half naked, paint ourselves up and dance, and it's one of the most culturally strong things I've ever done. But had I done that, at that time, probably wouldn't have been looked at as cool as it is now. Those things, and especially in sport now, there's so much stuff coming up around sport that, it's going to be amazing to see in 15 years what's the sport look like, what does competition look like. But for me here at the moment, I'm just trying to find ways to bring people together in sport. How do we get more people playing the physical, mental, spiritual battles even? How can, we've lost a lot of it. But we're even getting to the point now where we're doing like online games in competition.
Wow.
Because it's, that's another realm. It's
esports,
now, So, and there's nothing better than beating one of my young people at a game they think they play. Oh my gosh. I got hit up the other day. One of my young persons asked me what it was like in the late 1900s. And I was like, and I'm like thinking to myself, what game do you play? Because I want to go research it. I want to go learn it. I want to play it to the point where I can beat you and then be like, hey, that's that 1900s play style right there, baby. That's me. Yeah. So for me, it's like, how can I bring what I've learned to the forefront? I just believe in team sports. I believe in a sport mentality where you can learn a lot about yourself really quickly. Yeah. I'm also a massive advocate for martial arts. Yeah. Don't care what it is, because that was probably one of my defining moments in my life. Was my dad. I think I got into a couple of altercations when I was younger at maybe parties or something, and my dad had said, "Oh, have you had a fight, son?" And I was, "Oh yeah, I have." Any good? And I was like, well, haven't got anything on my face. Getting a bit cocky. And I think I was about 6 foot when I was about 16, 15, 16. I would have been 6 foot. He goes, oh, should go and have a spar. And we were sparring at school and like just bullshit spars. So done. So he took me to this boxing gym. And I remember, I can clearly remember it. That's why I know it's traumatic. It's enlightening. Yeah. I was jabbing around because I was taller than him and I had a longer reach. I was jabbing, and I was like, I'm doing pretty well. This is pretty awesome.
Your old man.
Yeah. And I lined him up and I hit him with this right cross straight down the barrel. Perfect, amazing shot. And I remember I hit him and I thought to myself, like, that's on. That's it. And he just blinked and just went boom and just came forward. And my heart gone. 0 ticker after that. And he beat the shit out of me for like, I don't know how many rounds. I came home, black eyes, my nose was all messed up, bleeding. And my mum beat the shit out of my dad. She was like, what the hell? I can remember him slapping him and being like, what did you do to our son? And all that sort of shit. But from that point on, I realized very quickly, I was like, there's always going to be someone bigger. There's always going to be someone badder. Yeah. There's always going to be something that you're not going to be able to control. Yeah. And from then on, I learned probably just enough to keep myself safe at any time. So, I went boxing, did a bit of Muay Thai in Sydney, BJJ, because I saw this dude at the gym and was like, what are you doing? And he's like, jump on the round. I think he was 70 or 75 kg, and I think I lasted like a minute. Yeah. And then I was like, yo, I'm going to learn some of this shit. Let's go. Yeah. So I've always learned enough, but I really think that it's one of the things that I had struggled with the government in terms of funding for. But I said, man, martial arts is so much more than punching someone in the face.
Exactly.
Like, that's the worst possible outcome at the end of the day if everything else failed. You know, so, the discipline, the training, the personal body awareness and all that sort of stuff. I couldn't advocate for more. Martial arts, sport, and now cultural performing arts is probably my next thing where I'm like, man, performing arts, creativity is the way we get to share the story of what we're going through at the moment. So those are my 3 pillars of what I'm trying to find money for. But so that's basically my breakdown in terms of the Haka here. Once we've sort of got that understanding that we are committed to our First Nations people, we started really learning, teaching Haka. I think we've got about 50 kids at the moment. From major different backgrounds. I don't think we've got a Maori Vietnamese yet. I don't think we've got one yet. I'll have to find someone. Surely there's one. But I know that there is a First Nations Fijian Vietnamese young person.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the mix.
Yeah. Wow.
So beautiful.
I think Maori Macedonian, Maori Cypriot, the different. But I can't see this. There's a Maori Vietnamese. There'll be someone out there surely. But we're teaching at the moment because that's probably one of the easiest ways to teach culture, performing arts. For me.
So, just stepping back on the sports program that you ran with and for CNY, tell us about the project and the impact that you were able to create through sport.
So, can't remember the name of the funding round. I want to say like African and Pacifica sporting grants, something, maybe. And at the time, literally in this office, I was sitting next to like, South Sudanese, colleague of mine. And I'm like, bro, we have never worked together. As much as we work in the same office, same thing, we're always, and this is the thing with people in our positions, we're always just busy. Like there's no stopping, there's no why don't we just take this one funding round? It's not massive amounts of money in the broader scheme of things, but it's a massive amount of money if we put it just towards a few different cultures. I said, what do you want to do? I go, why don't we have a sporting tournament, like a cross intercultural inter-sport tournament over 3 days. We make it all free, and it's First Nations, African, and Pacific Islander. And he's like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah. And we started like, this is the thing, when you share that background of global First Nations background, the banter's pretty rough too. And so we're talking, I'm like, bro, but the problem is going to be, we're not going to be able to have a run sheet. So I go, you guys, and we start going off, I'm going, bro, Islanders, we got bad time management. First Nations, same thing. We just see time differently, like you fellas. And I'm talking to all because CSG wasn't there at the time. It was about 4 months. You fellas take the cake. We're going to get nothing done. And they go, I can't believe it's Tyson. I'm like, am I telling the truth or am I telling the truth? They're like, yeah, we're going to have to work something out. So we're like working out, how do we run something without any time? How do we do that? How do we run something where no matter what time people turn up, they can have the same experience? And so that changed my thinking about a lot of things.
Wow.
It changed my thinking about agendas and times and run sheets and programs, and it turned into just massive blocks, and then it was like telling our stakeholders, like, they're like, what time do you want us to be there? What time are we going to run? We're going to run this. I'm like, nah. You're going to find out what we can run on the day with the people that we're going to run, and we're going to do what we want to do. And we're going to try and make this experience that people get together with as good as possible. And that, funnily enough, made more anxiety in our stakeholders than I had ever seen. Yeah. Because they wanted this guaranteed structure here. And I was like, well, we can't guarantee that it's going to be like that. But then the people on the ground, the grassroots people running the programs, loved it. Yeah. What do you mean I don't have to? Oh, I don't know. Okay, cool. We'll figure out what happens on the day. Oh, there's 7 kids now. There's 14 kids later. There's 26 kids. Then whatever happens, we'll do it. And so we had a really cool thing. This was right after the first sort of COVID release of people. It was like possibly the worst possible time to ever plan. I don't know what projects you guys were running or doing at the time. But, we were successful for around 30 grand, I think, for this one grant. I think we saw about 26 of that. and we ran 3 days. I think we had around 200, I can't remember the numbers, 200 to 300 young people each of those 3 days.
Yeah.
The first 2 days were out in Aintree. We had this big sort of sporting ground there. We did like volleyball, soccer, rugby. Volleyball, soccer, rugby. I can't remember what else we did. AFL.
Yeah.
So across those 2 days, those sort of 4 sports. Oh, we did netball as well. Generally speaking, those 5 sports translated quite well across the target cohorts, the cold communities.
Yep.
But in my mind, it was trying to create a space that was that people from those backgrounds could understand that we were doing it for them. But it wasn't an exclusive space, so anyone could come.
Yeah.
As long as they were willing to respect that space. We had about 17 police officers come down as well and support the space. And when I mean support, I mean actual support, because I said, I was talking to the acting seated member at the time, and I said, if you send these police here, they have to come without any of their gear. Just send them some stuff, put the stuff in their cars. They got to be able to play as well. All that sort of stuff.
You have to participate.
So they were jumping in. It was so good until one of our girls broke a police officer's collarbone.
Oh shit!
Smoked them, right? So they're playing tag, and like he sort of goes to sidestep her. She sort of nudges him, gives a bit of a shoulder, and he takes a fall. But the funniest thing I've thought about it in the cell, like, you know, sometimes we forget, like, some of our members are people. In the room when they told me, I looked at the person in charge and I was like, how do we want to do this? Because, like, did you guys get clearance to be able to be playing? He's like, leave it with me. We'll put him in the car. We'll take him to the hospital. No write-ups. No write-ups. I was like, cool, man, that's us.
That's us.
The rest of them were like, did anyone get it on camera? And they did. So they're all sharing it like little kids at, like, you know, school. They're all sharing this video to one another, and it was just like, you know, G'd everyone up for the rest of the day. So, you know, police in a space where, you know, generally speaking, these young people in police would always be on the opposite sides of the coin. We're putting them in a competitive space. I've played for the Victorian Police rugby team before, purely because those are the places where you get to really understand that the people in that on that other side of the line, generally speaking, in front of you or conflicting with you as a person of sort of colour or culture, is a person. At the end of the day, they are a person. They are a part of something that is bigger than them. They are, you know, for whatever reason, they're doing what they're doing. But in this space, they were there to support. On the third day, we had a cultural, I want to say, festival, where we had different schools perform cultural dances at CRC. We had cultural food, we had a market, we had all these sort of things happen, because my thing is, like, we don't just have sport. Like, we don't just turn up, play the game, go home. That whole wraparound has to be the culture of the group or the community that's putting on that day has to be put first. The sporting game will happen. Like, the sport will happen at some point, but the care for the people, they're recognizing that someone's going to be hungry. They're recognizing that someone's going to want to buy something. They're going to take photos. They're going to want to be entertained. There's going to be different age groups. That all has to be taken into account first. And if that's signed and sealed and delivered, then the sport is going to be awesome. So that was the idea. 2 days of learning how to play a new sport, playing with different cultures, different ages. That's another thing that we do really well back home. You play with your 5-year-old players with your 15-year-old. Like, there's no real thing about, you know, oh, I'm too old, I'm too cool for you now. In some ways, the younger ones, you know, can almost get encouraged to jump in with the older ones. They learn quicker. But yeah, in that space, that the name came up was Afronesia. So that was the festival name was Afronesia, created by the team, which is cool. But the biggest success behind that was having those conversations with the stakeholders and them recognizing that these cohorts are not just the cohort to tick a box and get money for. It's like 100% go get that funding. Your organization is doing great work, but when you get that funding, let this be the first thing that you think about. Let the community be the first people that you talk to. Let their voice or what they say guide you immediately. Don't set everything up and then go to the community and then tell them what they're doing. like take your time, and that care and that appreciation will then flow through to whatever community you're working with. So that's basically what happened with that session. We had a COVID scare, which was really rough at that time. And a million things went wrong. But like, if you don't do it, like you're gonna get shit wrong no matter what you do. And everything you do in business and community services and volunteering in your day-to-day life and your family, you're gonna get shit wrong. But if you don't attempt it, if you don't try, if you don't, what I said before, if you haven't got that enough self-awareness or understanding of your culture to have some sort of innate responsibility to do something better for someone else, then I don't, as much as I have time for everyone, I don't have time for those people. I'm like, guys, really love you in your own space, but unless you're going to get out there and do something like a podcast, unless you're going to get out there and try something, even if it's just make a cup of tea for your nan and sit with her, do something to better the life of somebody else, then if you get, how many people are in Victoria? Like 6 million people? If 6 million people did that every day or practice that, it would be killing it. 100%. But there's 1% of the people doing that.
Definitely agree. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. So we end our podcast with 3 questions.
Okay.
So first question, what are you grateful for?
I'm just grateful for breath. I really like that. Today I'm just thinking more about breath, which is good. I'm grateful for breath, for life, and for sharing. For sharing without any is inhibition. Is inhibition of it? Without any inhibitions, just sharing.
Second question, what have you realized?
During the podcast?
Anytime. Can be during the podcast or whatever.
I think one of the things, and the same thing with you, is that I get jealous of people that haven't had their cultural epiphany yet. And I realized that there was even one little thought, like, imagine if you didn't learn, like, how good would it be to just be ignorant to these problems? Like,
ignorance is bliss.
Like, how good would it be? So I realized that dude, I was like, this is funny. Like, why am I jealous of someone who hasn't had that moment yet? And I'm like, it would have just been so much easier to not care about these things. It would have been so much easier to just do that, like, what is it? The Simba, like, run away. Run away and never look back. I realized that today.
Definitely. Final question. What is a question you ask yourself?
If I'm doing the right thing. That's a hard one. All the time, especially in community work, or especially when I'm coming into contact with systems, and the pressures of money or of policy, or the pressures between business and culture. Those pressures. Am I doing the right thing? Is this actually the right thing to do? That's probably self-doubt.
That's beautiful. Look, Tyson, thank you so much for joining us today, and wow, what a beautiful conversation, and really opened my eyes to the importance of culture and the deeper meanings behind it too. Where can people find you, and how can they support you as well?
You can find me in the western suburbs. On these streets. Just say, I have a LinkedIn profile. I think that's probably the easiest. I'll share. I work for an Aboriginal corporation, but generally speaking, if I do any community stuff, it's either through my not-for-profit organisation. They were started by William Morris and Kamata Mankilo, and that's Ngā Matai Parua, or NMP. For our whānau that quite can't get the full name. And then I have started a space called Melbourne Cultural Consultants. It actually had another name, but I realized through my work I wanted to create something that was outside of my culture. So we've called it Melbourne Cultural Consultants, because that's where you will engage with people that I believe are some of the best consultants in the world. Might not have it on paper, but they are some of the most amazing people that you can consult with, if you have cultural needs or you are experiencing issues but in cultural conflict. So melbourneculturalconsultants.com, my number and emails on there, or LinkedIn, or through our not-for-profit organisation.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much again. And we hope you enjoy this podcast. Always stay safe, always take care, and always get up. Peace.
Yeah.
Like that. Sick.